I've seen pictures of Mike, and he's an absolute fine specimen of a man. Huge arms. Guns. His guns are bulging, if that's the right terminology.
He looks a bit like a cross between Vin Diesel and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
And I mean, who wouldn't want to, really?
So just talking about as a modern 21st century society, we love to think that we're civilized. We love to think that we're rational and educated. And we love to think that we're inclusive. We're much more careful than ever before about what we say, to whom we say it, and how we say it. And we have all kinds of strategies and supports and words that we use to ensure that people don't feel marginalized, minimized, or even ostracized. And that's not true in all cases. And despite all the fashionable talk of embracing diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion, and despite the fact that we love to see ourselves as fair and just, the fact of the matter is that on a daily basis, we as a society are doing an injustice to thousands of people around the world, thousands of men, in fact, and some women, who are made to feel ashamed, worthless, and sometimes even scared, simply because of who they naturally are. And we know this as stigmatization, which is a propagation of the groundless and poisonous idea that men who seek testosterone therapy and women who seek testosterone therapy through HRT are somehow less than real men or women, and therefore deserve less respect from society. So that's the definition of stigmatization. So this stigma is a spreading stain on society and a determining factor in the physical and mental deterioration. You might be wondering who I am. Why am I so worked up about all this? Why is this such a passion issue for me? I've been on TRT, Testosterone Replacement Therapy, for 26 years. I founded Balance My Hormones, the first and largest UK TRT clinic and platform that also supports it with a pharmacy called The Hormonist. I've also brought the approach of an American-style TRT and HRT service, but with British sensibilities, to the UK and Europe. My first experience on TRT was 26 years ago, where I discovered I was androgen deficient as a young adult. It's helped me so incredibly ever since then, and that's why I set up Balance My Hormones. I have a YouTube channel. Anyway, the aim of the channel is to help educate men and women about some of the current issues surrounding not just stigma, but all sorts of information about TRT, HRT, health and wellness. I mean, we even did a video on NoFap, which seemed to get the most views of any. I don't know if you know what NoFap is. Like, you could put a really serious video about, all sorts of important medical things, and then you get maybe 500 views, and then you put one on NoFap and what it's all about, or you get thousands on the NoFap one. So what's interesting is every day at our clinic, we hear stories of patients who are actually denied care, especially in the UK, by their GP, the NHS. And every day, these guys have a genuine fear that they're not going to get treatment. But they also have a fear, that's like a genuine fear up there, that their significant others, their friends, family members might discover that they're on TRT. And some of the men feel more comfortable discussing their sexuality, coming out of the closet, if you will, that's why you got them in the wardrobe, and then tell their partners or significant others that they're on TRT. It's not right. It's not right at all that they have this, partly due to stigma. So the medical experts are the ones that should really know better, and it's actually partly the cause of some of this are the so-called medical experts. And they're actually causing what we think is like a silent crisis. And it's ruining the lives of many, many men every day. You might ask yourself, well, where is this coming from? And there are all sorts of challenges that we have to overcome, a myriad of challenges in acceptance of testosterone therapy as a mainstream medical treatment. And I think most of us not understand precisely why there's a stigma and the underlying issues. And I don't have time to go into a forensic details of what all these issues are, but I would like to highlight a few of the main ones, as well as talk about my own experiences and understanding of how beneficial this treatment is and how critical it is if you are deficient in TRT. And hopefully we can cultivate acceptance, a mental wellness and mental health issue for both men and women. And perhaps the most challenging aspect of working with testosterone deficiency and its treatment is really the resistance among both the non-medical community as well as the medical community, in actually accepting TRT as a legitimate and mainstream treatment. I mean, if you looked at the literature, you'd be hard pushed to find another field of medicine where there's so much comprehensive data, so much literature, so much scientific data on the benefits of TRT. And yes, there are also some conflicting data about potential side effects, but this topic seems to generate so much skepticism and ongoing confusion and really fiercely negative sentiments about it. So what are some of the most prevalent reasons for this illogical positioning and stance? There are two camps, like I was saying. There's the cultural and societal camp who may be causing the stigma, but there's the scientific community itself. And we could say that the general public could be largely forgiven for misunderstanding and misconstruing things as they're only making sense of what they hear from so-called experts. And these experts are the epicenters of the real issue, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. So I'm not trying to make a judgment on the quality of their character, but I am calling into question why they say what they say. Because when you really explore this issue properly and objectively, you can clearly see that their position doesn't make any sense at all. And that's the problem, is the bias. So let's start with some personal biases that I've seen directed towards me and my company by UK endocrinologists in particular. These are medical specialists who treat people with a range of conditions caused by problems with their hormones and the glands that generate the hormones. It's popular to think, perhaps from the way that the British, we are portrayed in American television series and movies, that all British people love three things: tea, good manners, and a sense of fair play. Well, I'm afraid to tell you that's just not true, apart from one thing, that the British really do love their tea, especially with a nice Victoria sponge cake. It's amazing. So, but as far as good manners goes, and a sense of fair play, that doesn't really exist in the British media and newspapers, what some may call the tabloid media. No way. And as far as good manners and a sense of fair play, they just don't exist. So anyway, the media are experts at bringing others on board to fight their fight and to stir up trouble, and they recruit willing doctors who are eager to jump on board. And so what happened to me is, for my company, Balance My Hormones, I was asked to be in an article by the Daily Mail, who I call the Daily Fail, because in this particular instance, they did really fail. And for other clinics I've seen, they offered a bit of a puff piece for them. Like in early January 2022, there was another clinic, never heard of them, obscure, in the UK. They did a really nice piece about all the benefits, but didn't talk about any of the negatives. And so for my company, that wasn't quite the case. So I was in the Daily Mail. They asked for a picture. The first picture, I was, I think, more of a smartly dressed in a suit, but like, oh no, can you give us something else? So actually we got the photographer in the room here that took the picture for me. And so, but they used this in a way, I mean, this is what came out. Is the quest for a Love Island body behind a boom in men injecting testosterone despite the risk of infertility and fatal blood clots? So is this panic and an obsession with the negative without talking about the positives, or the negative of having low levels of testosterone throughout the duration of your life? And so I put some quotes here from the article. Hormone experts have been warned that private clinics, and in the UK it's a bit of the socialized medicine, you see. So private is just as bad as the testosterone, really, in the minds of the media. They're putting young men at risk of infertility and potentially fatal blood clots, selling them unnecessary testosterone. And then that's a very subjective thing to put in there. And that's not really journalism, which is why most people consider the Daily Mail as a tabloid. But it does have a massive viewership. By the way, I did ask them for a backlink. After they put me through all the trouble, they put a backlink to my website, which is balancemyhormones.co.uk. So interesting note. So these are some of the comments from the actual people who read this rag. And I mean, you can see some of the things, it will damage the heart. I've heard this, or someone's shooting up in the changing room. So it's all this conflation between legitimate medicine, which they don't see, and some sort of illegitimate anabolic steroid use. There were some other ones that were a little bit more positive, but the majority of them were like this because some people are very ignorant, and like I said, it might not be directly their fault, but it's been pushed on them by the media and some people not in the know in the medical community. And that's something that we have to fight every day, this this prejudice for it. So they did the article with me. I should have recorded it. I didn't. Then they said, oh, that went really, really well. Why don't we have you on our podcast? So it's called Medical Minefield. And these guys talk about, they're medical journalists, and they talk about this. I said, oh, I'll come on your podcast. I thought, no, exposure is good. I hadn't seen the article then. We just did the interview, and then a few days later, they said, let's film this. So again, I thought this is great, puff piece. So here's a quick few sound bites.
That testosterone levels in men are falling, which is an interesting phenomena.
Yes, most studies seem to suggest that testosterone levels as a whole across the whole globe have dropped by about 25% over the last decade, which is interesting.
Hormone disruptors.
Yes. It's the plastics,
it's
microplastics.
Microplastics in the
5G.
environment. Oh, is it?
So, I mean, these guys are they're taking the piss. They're taking the mick out of, the plastics. Is it really happening? This might be just kind of how they do their presentation, but it was really patronizing, to say the least. So we'll go on.
Testosterone levels are dropping.
And as with any interesting but not fully understood area of medicine, there is now, of course, a huge burgeoning private medical industry just poised to sell people products or drugs or treatments that claim to help treat this issue.
The NHS, the National Health Service, in the minds of the British public now has become so ingrained that it is a national treasure. And anything that's private is looked at as a dirty word. Now, in the United States, we know it's all private. And obviously there's Medicare or Medicaid, or you have other private insurance companies covering it, but you have private providers. But in the UK, there have always been private providers, but they've always been looked down upon, especially there's a street called Harley Street in London. We have a whole street of private doctors, private providers, but that's usually for the more affluent that would use it, or those who have insurance, or those who pay cash. So there's this very much class divide in the UK, and so in the UK they tend to demonize private because they think everything should be run by the state. But what they don't tell you is that the state also denies care, also is looking at the monetary aspects of it, because they want to not provide the service, thereby saving money for the system. But what they don't realize is TRT is a preventative, and they are actually costing the system more. If they would treat men who need the testosterone treatment properly, maybe reduce lots of the comorbidities that go along with aging, diabetes, and these other sorts of diseases as we age. And we don't know why young people are also coming to our clinic for testosterone replacement therapy. We're seeing more and more of that as well. So let me play a little bit more of this.
That may or may not be an issue.
Whenever there's a grey area, there is a private clinic. I will tell you that for free.
When I was writing about this a decade ago, the menopause, there was one clinic, one doctor who was really pioneering this stuff. And when we started looking at it over the last few weeks, I was amazed to see that there are scores of private clinics across the UK.
There's hundreds of them.
There are internet forums brimming with people talking about and sharing tips on testosterone replacement therapy. It's a huge thing, and these are young.
So this guy hates the private side, but what's ironic is he has his own private clinic treating transgender care patients, okay, as well as the NHS, but he's the NHS consultant, they're called. He's part of the British Society of Endocrinology, and just very much demonizes anyone other than him who does TRT. And he doesn't do that often. I can tell you my doctors have probably done 100 times more than he has in his probably whole career. But here we go.
Business model depends on it. So these men certainly want the treatment. Whether they need it, almost certainly not. If they needed it, they would receive the treatment from a recognized NHS clinic. But
I believe it's this.
So, I mean, this is a mentality that we have to deal with in the UK. So they're just very close-minded. I mean, we've seen this. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Mark Gordon. I've met with him. He was going to bring he does like warriors for TBI, traumatic brain injuries. He was trying to bring some of this to the UK, and they wouldn't have it. So that's just kind of what we're dealing with. And finally, I get a backhanded compliment, so make sure I wore a tight shirt today.
He's an absolute fine specimen of a man, huge arms. His guns are bulging, if that's the right terminology.
He looks a bit like a cross between Vin Diesel and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
And I mean, who wouldn't want to, really?
He didn't even ask me for my number. I mean, he's really, no, it's not my type anyway. So anyway, that was the radio program. That really it got me frustrated when I found out. But I'm going to, get the word out because of this. But luckily, there was this lovely chap named Kevin O'Sullivan. There's this new thing called Talk TV in the UK. It's on the national television program. It used to be a talk radio, and they've converted it to Talk TV. So I've got a few clips for this program. So I guess he saw the article in the Daily Fail and said, this guy, it's not fair. He got a bad coverage. Maybe we can have him on. Plus, that's how the media works. So I said, all right, I'll come down. This was a few weeks later, and he had me on the program. So here's a few snippets from this.
Now, doctors have warned that this is a very dangerous thing to do. Now, the guy who was featured in the story has been very kind enough to come on in. He's the founder of a company called Balance My Hormones, and his name is Mike Coxis. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Now, you are how old now?
I'm 48 years old.
And you've been injecting yourself with testosterone twice a week for 26 years, is that right?
It's been all different protocols. When I first started, it was injections from the doctor. Then it was eventually patches. And then it was topical scrotal creams. And then eventually, because of logistics, it was injections, sometimes every 5 days. Currently, my treatment plan is every 3 days, a small amount every 3 days. But
do you sorry to interrupt. Do you need it medically then?
Yes, I need it medically. This is not the problem with this article. Was they conflated testosterone replacement therapy with muscles and Love Island, and it's all nonsense, because obviously there's a medical condition. I needed the medical condition. There's many men that are suffering.
Had a deficiency.
I had a deficiency in testosterone.
How does that manifest itself?
Well, I had a varicocele. And I didn't know, and the varicocele is damaging to the testes. So the varicocele is lowering the amount of testicular output. So there's like a bundle of veins that get heat up, and they hurt fertility, and they also hurt testosterone levels. And that's documented in the British Society for Guidelines for Sexual.
So yeah, the British Society for Sexual Medicine talks about different causes of low testosterone. Varicocele being one of them. You could have had the mumps. You could have had damage to your testes. It could have been environmental toxins. You can have an elevated luteinizing hormone too high, yet your testosterone level isn't high enough. So there's multiple reasons for it. And what I find interesting, and what I didn't put in the other podcast, is they talked about reference ranges around testosterone treatment. It goes for women too, but it's much more focused on men because women the levels aren't quite as high. And the issue is, when I first 26 years ago looked at the reference ranges from like LabCorp, it was like 400 to 450 nanograms per deciliter at the low end of the range. Now it's in the 200s. This is insanity. Are we evolving into less of men, because of this? So for the NHS or doctors in endocrinology, or even just the general public, to assume that the number on their lab report is an optimal level for health is completely wrong. And that's the thing that we fight. I think it's the same thing in the US, where your primary care doctor, if you've gone to a TRT clinic in the US, you've got to work with that primary care doctor, but they might not be aware or as nuanced or understanding of TRT, and they may discredit the TRT clinic because in their limited opinion, they don't think you should be on it. So that's something that we're constantly fighting, and that's why I made the presentation. But there's a lot more to it, and it's part of a much wider issue and an international one. That the scientists and doctors, like I said, they are at the heart of this. So there's no doubt, from my experience, that TRT helps androgen deficient men, and those who are underdiagnosed are really, really missing out. And lots of that is due to these cultural attitudes and behaviors by the people in the scientific community. And yeah, it's amazing. There remains a truly staggering amount of bias by these doctors, by the NHS, by institutions, and in general across Europe. So there's one more paper I wanted to show you from the US, and it's a more recent one. And I think it's trickling in here. I think it's always been here to a certain degree. And this is a paper that was put into JAMA, a guideline discordant care among direct-to-consumer testosterone therapy platforms. So I've always called Balance My Hormones a platform. We started off, we're an online clinic. We've had clinics before, but then with COVID, we had to go completely online, and we're looking to probably get another space because it is useful to have space, but you can also do good medical care online, especially with TRT. And sometimes I would argue better, because with our platform, we have coaches and support teams that walk patients through as well as the doctors. So this study is showing that other platforms, particularly in the USA, they're not giving treatment according to the guidance, which are these narrow reference ranges. And the guidance they select is from the endocrinology societies in the United States as well. And so they did some undercover secret shopper analysis of, do these people get it? And they pointed out in the article, someone got testosterone treatment who was 600 nanograms per deciliter. But what they didn't tell you was what was their SHBG, what was their free testosterone, what were their symptoms? Did you measure the genetics and look at the CAG repeats? Was it long CAG repeats or short CAG repeats? Because I don't know if you have a long CAG repeats in your genome, you may be more androgen resistant. You may require a higher amount of androgens than the next person. Compared if you have short CAG repeats, you may require a little bit less. An example, I want to thank Rick Collins. He sent me that article. A couple other things I wanted to address is, so when a patient in the UK does get into the GP or get an appointment, there's a long waiting period. So they might get the initial appointment, they wait ages for the biomarkers, for the blood tests to be completed. And then they go see the endocrinologist after the GP sent them, and guess what? They're denied care. Or they're told to go through another 6 months to years of blood tests, even though they would fit with the British Society of Sexual Medicine, some of the American studies, but not the NHS. And they're cut off for that. I think it's about 150, under 200, so it's really despicable despite having symptoms. Patients are rejected, they're told they're okay, or what we call in the UK, they get fobbed off. But we think it's because of conflict of interest, and I don't know if you've heard of medical gaslighting, or gaslighting in general. I think that's what we tell, oh yeah, it's fine. Now it's called medical gaslighting that we have to deal with. But there's another story out of Europe, Norway in particular, that we find stories from our patients that call us from Norway, and saying that in order to use the gym, and if they look too muscly, more muscly than they ought to, they have to submit to drugs tests to make sure they're not on anabolic steroids. And the police may even go to their home to make sure they're not on anabolic steroids. And if they don't submit to the tests, they can't belong to that gym. So lots of press-ups for them at home or push-ups at home. So it's going on in the world, and it's really ridiculous. I think what happens in Scandinavian countries, when it happens in one location in Scandinavia, it moves on to the other. So far, Denmark's okay from what we can tell. Yeah, it's frustrating. And they won't even allow, because of doping laws, they won't even allow a European Union country, because I don't know if you guys know how the European Union works. It's kind of like the States, where you can there's a customs union, send medication from one European country to the other. Sweden's decided they're not going to respect that because of doping. So I spoke to Katrina, I think her name was, one of the customs officers in Sweden, and she said, we stopped a woman's HRT from coming through because it had testosterone in it. You can't send from another pharmacy, and she was getting cream. It was an HRT cream, testosterone cream, couldn't even get it because they don't do creams, compounded creams in Sweden. So it's really, really ridiculous. Again, the bias between doping as well as, against really all the hormones, but in particular testosterone, even for women. And that leads us to this, what social scientists call the poppy syndrome, right? All the poppies grow at the same height. And when one poppy grows too tall, they chop it down. So this is an attitude, not just in Norway and Scandinavia, but in particular in the UK. I think Margaret Thatcher used that quote. So we don't like the poppy syndrome. It's not a good thing. Everyone, I think in America, it's all about exceptionalism, everyone rising to the top, doing the best they can. It's not the case in Europe and not the case in the UK, unfortunately. So really, look, there's things that we can do. How do we stop the stigma? You can write to your congressman or your MP, member of parliament. Chances are you've got the knowledge. If you can educate others, they've got the knowledge, and then they also have the power. They might be able to do something. You can try to join certain groups, join the societies, make an influence, make an impact on the societies. You can be an advocate just in your daily life, talking about the positive benefits of TRT, okay, that you're not less of a man or woman for doing it. And if we do that, and finally, I guess you could keep your head up high and think that there is more to life. You can get on with your life, you can crack on, and you don't have to let this negativity bring you down, because you only have one life, and best to make the most of it. And if you're on TRT, it can actually enhance your life, and you should enjoy it. So appreciate you guys for listening and coming to watch the presentation.